Hey everybody, I'm Cody from Better Equipped. I'm so glad you joined us today for this really special conversation with an incredibly special guest. His name is Garrett Murphy. Welcome him to this. Woo! Garrett, man.
Stop,
so
Cody.
good to see you. Glad you're here. It's been a long time coming. And Garrett, as you know, but maybe people have caught on to a little bit more of the description, but we're going to be talking about a journey to freedom from pornography, and really specifically starting with your story, and even this is a part of one of those things we have in common, even under the umbrella of Christ, is you and I both, this is a big part of our story in finding freedom from the chains and bondage of pornography. And it's so prevalent. And for those of you who are listening, the stats are crazy high. Garrett, what are they? They're pretty high. What are stats nowadays?
I'm not sure. They've been high for a long time. I can only imagine they're just going to get higher and higher. But the one 90, I use is like 70% of men, even within the church, seek out pornography, use pornography on a regular basis, and like a third of women. They're staggering.
Exactly. And the average age of someone looking at porn for the first time is 9. But before we get into all of that, Garrett Murphy, he's the founder of My Kids. That's not an organization. That just means that he's got, you got 3 kids, right?
I've got 3 kids. I've started a few things in life. Finished a few of them, not very many. I start a lot more things than I finish. But out of all those things, I'm most proud of starting My Kids. So
yeah, and tell me more about your co-founder. Who's the co-founder with you and your kids, your wife?
I call her Baby Girl or Sugar
Baby
Lips,
Girl?
one of those two. Yeah, and
we shouldn't call her that though, should we?
I encourage it if done in a healthy and respectful way. I guess I think I'm asking for it, but yeah, sure, whatever your counterpart also is.
That's her internet name is Baby Girl. And
oh gosh,
that's her code name. I'm just meaning we don't have to share.
Yeah. Here we go.
Just Baby Girl. Well, so tell me this, Garrett. Let's hop right in with this because, do you remember how old you were? Not what you saw, but do you remember how old you were when you first saw like your first pornographic image?
I think I remember exactly what I saw. I have a horrible memory, but when it comes to sexually explicit things, it goes
Burns
back
a little differently.
It goes back. I was actually 10 years old, and we were at a gospel meeting, like a revival for a church. It was in the next town over, and one of my buddies, his grandpa was an elder, asked me if I wanted to come stay the night at his grandpa's house. And he was in town and staying the night, and I loved hanging out with friends, and always loved going and having sleepovers. So went over there and we watched. I have no idea what channel it was on. We only had 5, the 5 basic cable channels growing up, or not cable, basic TV. But went over there and watched. I think it was something like Bikini Beach Hoedown, and it was just a bunch of women in thongs, and their chests were blurred out. So whatever it was, they were blurred out barely, but that was enough. I'd never seen anything like it, and had no idea that was the beginning. Like literally, that was the beginning.
Did you immediately feel like from your flesh, kind of drawn to it, hooked, like the cravings, like not knowing what that would lead to and even how to get a hold of more potentially, but it's not like you had to train your appetite for it, or did you feel like it was something that came in time?
I mean, I knew better than to watch that. Okay.
Right.
So,
okay.
And I couldn't stop watching. I just remember like what in the world? I didn't know they made stuff like this, and I've never seen anything like this. And then that night, something happened. Is this a G-rated? I don't know. It's not. Mature audience.
The people are smart though. Something happened tonight.
Yeah, that night, sometime in the middle of the night, I was awake and conscious, not knowing what I was doing. Something happened, and I was like pretty much scared to death. But also, I remember the next day thinking, "What was that?" And I want it to happen again. And that's what I mean. That was the beginning of just like this curiosity of. I didn't even know what it was. Nobody ever explained to me what ejaculation was or what anything like that was. And so I was curious, and as a curious young boy, that was the beginning of it.
So, you that's your starting point more, more formally. I was 16, and which was way later than a lot of my friends. My friends were talking about it. And I mean, I knew I didn't ever want to look at it. And I knew it was, I even knew at that age, I knew it was easier to stop by never starting. And, 16, but I felt I knew before 16 that it was something that I was afraid would get a hold of my mind and heart if I looked at it. And so at 10 and you go on, I mean, how did that, whether you want to call it battle or a relationship, and I don't mean that in a healthy way, but what was your relationship like with porn? Like what did it lead you to at its lowest point? Like, how'd you get there? Did you become callous to it and just not think about it? Did you feel really guilty about it, or did the guilt wear off? Like, what was that journey like?
I mean, I feel like what I can remember from that age was trying to find anything that had a woman on it, whether they were fully clothed, in a 5-piece suit. They probably did wear 5-piece suits back then, actually. But like pretty much anything. I was literally trying to find it. So when I got my hands on not Victoria's Secret, JCPenney catalog, I had that for a long, long time. But anyway, I wasn't really exposed for a few more years to more softcore pornography. It was at my friends' houses that I was in the youth group with. So once again, all of my exposures to pornographic images, my parents did a great job protecting me, keeping it out of our home. But it was at youth group, or it was at my friends' houses when I'd go to their homes after church or have sleepovers. They had those channels. I imagine their dads had those channels intentionally, or they had access to the internet, which was on dial-up back then, and somehow they had these horribly pixelated images that they printed off. So like that was my exposure, but that was a few years later. But from age 10, it was pretty much just like, I remember it being curiosity and trying to figure out how to find the privacy to do that. And I remember it always felt bad. I was raised in a Christian home, and I've always loved God and wanted to be good, wanted to please Him. And so from that moment, that night, I hid it in the darkness, right? It stayed hidden from that point on. And it got unhealthier and unhealthier and unhealthier from that point on.
How much would you say Satan was trying to very early on, like 10 years old, first situation where he's like, you can't ever tell anybody. That's the darkness you're talking about. Hide it in the darkness. Kind of, this is the end of you if people find out. You may never be forgiven, or like these lies from the enemy. Talk about what lies do you remember kind of going through your head?
Oh yeah, I remember. My parents really never had a talk with me about that. At least not that I remember. I feel like I would remember that. I still remember every scene from every movie I watched where like they made out. My parents, they'd like cover my eyes and stuff. And honestly, I'm glad they did, because it was so powerful at that age to see that kind of stuff. Like I didn't forget it. It would consume me afterwards. And so it wasn't something they did wrong. I think they did that right. But I do remember at that young age being so afraid that I would get caught or someone would find out. But also it's like because I had never had to talk, I didn't know it was like how our bodies were created, that God created us that way. And that at that young age, not having someone to teach me things, it was like I didn't know that my dad like even knew what that was, or that I was going to get caught. Like it came a few years later as buddies talked about it. It's like, oh, okay, that's a normal thing. So there was a shame of feeling like a freak for the first few years.
Right.
But
nobody else is dealing with this.
Yeah. But not talking about it with anybody, I felt like something was really, really wrong with me. And I had this perversion and I was gross and people would be disgusted with me and reject me, and God is disgusted with me. And if I don't change, like I'm rejected, and so I'm unlovable. And so I don't remember I remember always having that feeling afterwards, but as most people that have an addiction to pornography, that goes away very quickly as soon as they have another trigger or just a little bit of time passes. So, but learning from age 10 to have that dichotomy, two separate lives compartmentalized, like learned that from a young age, how to hide that in the darkness. And I'm a very authentic person who talks openly about my feelings and everything going on in my life, except for that one thing. So.
Right. And it's interesting for a lot of us, a lot of our listeners right now, they're thinking, especially our younger listeners, like however, we're not quite 40 yet, but there's a lot of people who are like, well, I mean, pornography is so normal. It's like when we were growing up, it was like hush hush, the internet's new.
Right.
Like, but the lies of the enemy, I think, still exist today that you're talking about. I don't think that's become irrelevant at all. Mm-hmm. But there's a new layer to this, which is, hey, it's not that big of a deal. Everybody's doing it. Everybody does it. It is natural. It is what the lies of the enemy have added to it as cultures become more and more desensitized. So it's kind of both, depending on your upbringing and what you've been surrounded by and what you're hearing from people around you, what you're subjected to. You might be saying that's not a sin, or that's not a problem, or that's not wrong, or that's totally natural. It's healthy even. Some people say, no, it's totally healthy. So what would you say to people who just think that, hey, this should just be normalized as a part of society, even if they're like a non-Christian listening? What would you say to people who are like, it's just not a big deal? Like, why do we make it? Why are we even talking about it? It's just not a big deal. Like, it's like you eat, you sleep, you take a shower, and you look at porn. It's like, what? Yeah. Like, even with whether they're in relationship or not, married or not, this is still something that, wouldn't you say, culture's trying to normalize and make it feel like just very casually, that's just a part of life? Yeah,
I certainly, absolutely. I don't know how anybody could argue against that. Everything's sexualized, and pornography's, if it's not already normalized, it's being, it has been normalized. And so it's everywhere. Anything you want to see, you can access it at any given time from anywhere in the world. And that is so extremely dangerous. And we are starting to see some of the effects of it. We will continue to see some of the effects of it. But, I think if we're talking about culture standard, that's one thing. The damage, and there's so much psychological damage and so many effects that's going to have on people, even not living under God's standard. But knowing like living under God's standard, to live and feel like a hypocrite since the age of 10.
Right.
Like that's for 20 years to be hiding secret sin, frequent secret sin, and thinking I don't like the real struggle is with identity. I mean, there's so many struggles. There's so many battles inside that one war there that it was with my identity. Am I the Christian? Am I the Christ follower I want to be and that everyone thinks I am? Because I was serving in, as I grew up, like I loved serving. I loved being at every event that our church ever had, every youth event that we could possibly go to. Loved all those things. Like, was that me? Or am I the perverted monster who looks at these things and who can't wait to be alone? And like that does some real damage when you feel like a hypocrite. And for me, as someone who I live with my heart on a sleeve, and I'll tell perfect strangers like all kinds of stuff. That was really, really tough for me to keep that in hiding, but I didn't see an example that we were allowed to talk about our sin within the church. And I don't know if we want to go this route, but within the church. Yeah. Okay.
Well, because you're hitting us like, while you were still really kind of in bondage to that, up until maybe that point where it started to change, we'll go there next. But did you see anybody talking about it in any healthy ways? Any Christian leaders, family members? And again, these are people that you love and loved you, but how hard was that to feel like you were just alone in that? Or did you have people that you felt like were talking about it in healthy ways?
No, I don't think anybody was talking about it in healthy ways. You'd hear them reference the scriptures, right? I especially remember the one, like, if your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and throw it from you. It's better for you to lose a part of your body than to be thrown into hell. Like, I thought about that. It's like, so pluck your eye out. It's better to do that. Cut your hand off. It's better for you to do that. And it's like you think about that as a young kid and you're like, I know what body part's causing me to sin. Am I like, is this real? But I can't talk to anybody about that, about that medical procedure. So no, I'm just kidding.
How many times did you promise God that was the last time?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I think hundreds before I was like, well, it's better for me to not promise and lie to God than it is to even say that anymore. Like there was this hopelessness that sets in. Like that's what the psychological things are, like the hopelessness that I can be who God wants me to be, who he's created me to be, the potential that I have to be as a servant in his kingdom. I'll never reach that with the sin in my life. And that's why I say, if we're living up to God's standard, this is a major, major, major issue. Any sin is an issue. The hidden sin is a bigger issue because you don't have accountability. You don't have people to help you with that. I remember, I'm sure my mom will see this podcast and she'll remember the conversation, but I went up to Ohio to stay with my cousins for a week, and they call me and they're like, hey, we're actually going to paint your bedroom while you're gone. We're going to paint your whole bedroom. And I was like, I knew that they'd have to move all my furniture out, and they were going to find the JCPenney catalog and the Valentine's Day edition of the JCPenney catalog that had all kinds of lacy undergarments and whatnot in it. And they were going to find my drawings, right? So I didn't have access to pornography. I created my own. So I'd find a picture and trace.
It's just like,
I'm a very open person. I would trace the body, but not draw the clothes on, and then draw what I thought was the lower body female anatomy. Like that's what I did, having very little exposure to it.
How close were you? How close was the imagine? I don't get detailed here. I'm just saying, were you even close? Were you even close?
Dude, I asked, maybe my mom kept them for safekeeping because they found them.
I've done some research before this call. I'm going to pull them up on the screen. No, I'm kidding. I found the drawings. No, I'm kidding. So
I couldn't look. I couldn't look.
So what? All right. So how long did it go? Like whether how old you were, what stage of life before we'll talk about what shifted everything for you. But like, we're talking 10 to 15 years old. We're talking 10 to 20 years old, a decade. Are we talking beyond that? I know the answer, but for anybody listening either on our podcast.
So that started at 10 years old. I mean, I will give you a little, I was sexually abused a few times as a child. Yeah. And
I'm so sorry, man.
Wasn't exposed to pornography that I know of then because I was very young, but that certainly a part of my story as well.
Sure.
But as far as the pornography goes, it just felt like I was a young, curious boy at age 10. By age, I think it was 13 or 14. That's when I was exposed to it in the, to pornography in the youth group and found out, it's on TV. My friends are finding pictures of this. Mm-hmm. Some of them were telling me their dads looked at it and that's how they found it on their computer. By age, my freshman year football camp, I saw my first magazine. Like a lot of guys find magazines very young. That's the first time I saw a magazine. I stole one of the magazines from football camp, took it home. Then from there, I had some buddies that would record it on VHS tape. All right, I know I sound pathetic to all of you young millennials and whatnots, but just old. But they'd so it was like any way I could get my hands on it, and that started in the teens. Then I remember the first time that I drove up to a gas station. I'd probably just gotten my license, and it was one of those things I dreaded the day I got my license because of the freedoms that it offered. But I went, or maybe you have to be 18, but like you can get things before then. So like I drove to this gas station and it was like super late at night. I remember waiting. I remember like wanting to puke, being so anxious because it was in my hometown and didn't want to get caught. Didn't want anyone to know. Like to hold up the banner of Christ was so important. I didn't want to misrepresent Christians or Christ or my family or anything. And except to the one clerk, right? That's what I was willing to do, but nobody else. And so I waited and just wanted to puke in the debate of, am I really going to do this? Am I really going to take this step? And I remember going in and just like, literally, I'll take that magazine. I have no idea what it was, but they're like, what? I remember them saying, which one? And I was like, that one. And like, this one? I'm like, yeah, sure. I don't care. Like, I really didn't care. I just wanted to be in and out as fast as I possibly could. We didn't have Wi-Fi on our phones. Like I didn't want to get caught on my mom's computer because the internet was so stinking slow anyway back then. But I remember, and it was like, I left. And just like with a lot of those VHSs, a lot of the magazine that I stole, with that magazine that I bought, and forever, I bought DVDs for a long time. I would use them and destroy them. Like the shame, the conviction, I would destroy them. I would promise again to myself, I would come up with a better plan, a different plan, a consequence, some sort of punishment for myself, and destroy it to get rid of the access to it. Yeah. And to try to keep it at bay as much as I possibly could. But that lasted. So I got married at age 20.
Okay.
Continued to use hardcore pornography for the next 10 years of my marriage. And so for 20 years, I was in hiding. And for 17 years, I was just hooked, consumed by pornpornography. Okay, if I could get my hands on it, right? But my brain was consumed by it.
What changed all that for you, man? Like what were the string of events that, what happened roughly at 30 or so that didn't continue to 40? Because that's a massive trend. And I'm not saying it's unique to you. I'm saying, you've got a massive trend of secrecy and darkness of meaning hiding it, suppressing it. Doesn't sound like you're talking to anybody about it, but you feel, from what sounds like, controlled by it, enslaved to it. You have this love for Christ that's real. It's not fake, but you feel fake because there's a huge part of you that is not in obedience to Christ.
Right.
And you're married now, and I'm assuming having kids. So, it's like you're not letting go of your faith, but that there's this massive chasm between what you say and how you're living. What changed that for you, man?
I mean, I hated that the entire time.
Yeah.
Like, I know that's not the case for many people, but I despised the hypocrisy. I despised not like just wrestling with that identity, wrestling with, am I saved? If I'm not repentant, like through my actions showing that I'm truly repentant, will I ever be in the presence of God? Like I thought about those things, but yet had no one to talk to them about. And then as I continued in the hopelessness of the sin, I had memorized every scripture growing up regarding sexual purity, sexual immorality. I had read not even a hint, and Every Man's Battle. Some of those, more than anything, those things would just trigger me, and I get so frustrated because they would literally trigger me. And I think that's a very common thing among men reading those types of books. It's a big red flag that you are just being sniped constantly. Like you don't even stand a chance. You don't even see the enemy coming when you're trying to fight the battle, and that's what's triggering you. And so, but I thought there was always, when I get married, I won't need that anymore. I won't do that anymore. It's enough. Right. So that was a huge milestone, just waiting, anticipating this, right? I can't wait to be freed. This is going to be my salvation from this bondage. And man, was I ever wrong, because, getting married at age 20, I have no idea what real sex, what real relationship looks like. And it certainly wasn't what I'd seen in pornography. And so it was confusing and difficult to understand. And it certainly felt different, mentally and emotionally, in every way. And so I'd passed that. Then it was, I remember growing up actually every year at summer camp, I was like, okay, I remember these prayers at the campfires and through tears and in the cabin that I'm not going to do it. I'm done. And sometimes I'd last a week, maybe 2 weeks after camp, maybe 3 weeks. I don't even know if that ever happened, but it's like, just like white knuckle, get through. But anyway, those things had happened my entire life. Marriage was probably the most defeating one that added onto the weight and the hopelessness of it all. Well,
the thing you thought would help you actually added to the guilt and the shame.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It added to the guilt, the shame, and the hopelessness, right? And so there were more things in life. Well, we had our daughter, I think 7 years later, and I was like, that I'm not going to, like, all of these women, it's someone's daughter. Like, you hear that a lot when you start talking about this, like, look at her as a child of God, she was created by God, and she's loved, and she has a father, and it's someone's daughter, like lots of stuff like that. And I thought that stuff too. And I thought, there's no way when this baby's born, like, this will be all I need. Right. I'm 28. Like, it's time. It's time. It was time. Well, then you got sleepless nights. Your wife's emotionally absent for like, it's the most exhausting time in your life. So of course, when you're stressed, when you're exhausted, fighting that battle that you've lost for the last 18 years, it's going to be really tough. So it was really difficult to see that milestone go by. But I had broken all the boundaries. So once we did have internet on our phones, I made a rule: I won't look at it on my phone, because once I look at it on my phone, it's with me forever. I'll always have access to it. So that was a huge one that I actually kept that going for years, even with high speed internet on the phone and endless data or whatever. But and then it was like, I won't look at it at work. How stupid could I possibly be? Right. And then I started looking at it at work, and it was like, man, you're being careless and reckless, and you're going to, and like, you're 28, you're 29, you're 30, and you're breaking all of these safe boundaries that you've had to not get caught and to stay in the darkness. Because if you do, you're going to lose all credibility as a Christ follower, as your reputation. I was a loan officer at a bank. I had been for 8 years. If they find out you're looking at it at work, like, everyone's going to label you as a creep, as a pervert, as a whatever. In the church, like, my wife, I'm sorry, I forgot to say, a year into our marriage, my wife found it on the computer, and she called me out. She came in the room. I was laying in the bed, and she yelled, like screamed at me. She's not a screamer. She's not a yeller. Right. And she yelled, right. If you ever do, I found that if you ever do it again, I'm gone. I'm out. Now, we didn't have kids at the time. She was 100% serious. Like, we'd been married a year. She's a very, very loyal woman. Very, very loyal. And that was like ultimate betrayal. Even though to me, it was just pornography, right?
So you never looked at it?
Yeah. So I never looked at it. Right? No, I remember it was a huge time in my life that I was like, if I've ever fought, I'm going to fight right now, because if she leaves me, then we get divorced. And if we get divorced, then I'm not going to be able to serve in the church anymore. And I'll always have that stain in my life forever and live with that. And I love her too. It wasn't I love her. Don't want to lose her too. But there was all this, like, now there's like £1 million if you ever look at it again. And she did mean it. Like, I don't think we would have worked that out. We were 21 years old, a year into marriage, like both very young and immature. And so, for the next, I think I made it 44 days, pure white knuckle, did not, like, without talking to anybody else about it. I think I made it that long until I finally believed enough lies and just couldn't handle it anymore. And I looked, and once I did, it was, dude, you better bury this and bury this deep, cover your tracks, do whatever. Not because it's like, I'm going to live here and I'm going to stay in this addiction. It was like, no, I'm going to fight. I'm so sorry. Like, I'm telling this to myself, to God, but it was so much scarier and real then, because I'd gotten away with it for pretty much 18 years, other than my mom finding those drawings in the catalog when they painted my room. But so I did cover my tracks better, and when I would do that, but it certainly limited how frequent I did it, until all of a sudden it didn't. You realize she's not really holding me accountable. She's not checking on me. We don't have filters. It's easy to get around them if you do, like that kind of stuff. And so that was literally the only conversation. I'm pretty sure the only conversation we ever had for the next 9 years.
So at that point in your life, are you just kind of giving up on really finding freedom from that? Was that, like, at that point in your life, did you really think that freedom was actually truly an option for you? Not did you want it, but had you kind of given up on it being realistic?
I mean, I'd say I always hated it, but I didn't always fight it. Let me say that. I always despised the sin and the fact that I partook in it, but I didn't always fight it with, like, I will find freedom, or I won't do this again. Like, it just felt so hopeless, and like, it's been going on forever. And now I can't even tell her. I can't tell anyone. Like, because if I tell somebody at church, they'll tell their wife, and they'll tell my wife, and like, it's all going to get out. So, it felt so hopeless. And that's what I was getting at in those later years, after we had my daughter, when I started looking at it at work, when I started looking at it on my phone, or on my phone, in the car, wherever, I was scared to death. Like, I'm like, I don't even know how to pray. Do I have a relationship with God at all? Because if it's about me obeying the rules, I'm not. So it was such a scary time, and I had nobody to talk to, and nowhere to go. I hadn't found any sort of resource that felt like it helped me. And I felt like I would just live with that sin forever. But because it had been escalating past all of the safe boundaries that I'd had before, I was just like, this is going to destroy me. My marriage will end. And then once it ends, I'm pretty sure my faith, like, I'll just be done, because I'll still have this sin, and I won't have my wife. I won't have my family. I won't have the support of the church. I won't have anything. And so, like, there was this fear of the rejection that would happen if anybody found out at age 30.
Ooh, I want to circle back to that. I think I'm going to circle back to that in a little bit concerning the church side. So tell me about the day when all that changed. Tell me about the day when hope came back into the picture. All right. What happened? Because I think if I'm listening, and again, I know the story, but But I'm listening. I'm like, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Like been there. What, like there's people listening going, I'm there, or I've been there, or I'm there. And I feel hopeless. And they're listening to something like this, even going like, all right, is there hope? And if they found it, what is it? Tell me, what was it for you?
There's a couple little backstories. One is really old. I'm a very goal-oriented person. I love setting goals and chasing crazy stuff. And one of them was I always had this goal to stop looking at porn. Every year, New Year's resolution, it was there. It was always in code, so nobody knew what it was if they saw it on a spreadsheet or on a piece of paper or in a notebook or whatever. But it was always there. Like ever since I made my first New Year's resolution, I think. And so that was always there. As I grew older in my faith, it was like I realized I don't know how to pray. Like prayer felt less than to me. Like very dead, very just like say the words. And I knew there was more to it. I read the Bible. Like there's more to it and it should feel different. It should mean more. I should understand it more. And so that became a New Year's, learn how to pray. And I was the youth leader at our church for quite a number of years. And I taught a class, and this was for me because this was on my New Year's resolutions that year as well. Learn how to pray. And there was this, we read a book, I think it was called Real Prayers. I haven't seen it since, don't know who wrote it, but it's called Real Prayers. And I think it was directed at youth. And it was great because it challenged me, and I challenged the youth to spend time in prayer every single day. And then we held each other accountable and talked about it in class every Wednesday night when we'd meet. But I took that to heart, and I was doing that every day. And I would remove myself, go up to the upstairs room in the house. I had looked at pornography up there many times before because it was up in the upper room in the house. But I went in the closet and I would lay down in the dark and pray. That was much different than saying a prayer and fall asleep at night. That was much different than praying around the table. It was so much different than some of the, most of my prayers were like, I'm so sorry. I don't even, I'm so sorry that I did that. Forgive me. Just forgive me. But anyway, I challenged them, pray for 5 minutes. And then it was like the next week, pray for 10 straight minutes every day this week. Pray for 15 minutes. Pray. And I was doing that. And in the book, it was leading me through because we didn't talk about the Holy Spirit a whole lot growing up. We didn't talk a whole lot about surrender, about living just completely sacrificing ourselves. And so I remember praying prayers I'd never prayed before about I'm so sick of being the way that I am. I'm so sick of feeling like I want you so badly, God, but I don't know how. I don't know where you are or how to get you. And it's my sin that's keeping me from it. But can you but make me whatever you want. It was purify me, those types of things, but do whatever needs to be done. And at that time, it felt so new and so different. It was shifting my heart a little. And a few months later, I'd bought a piece of property because I felt like the Lord had led me to buy this piece of property so I could retire because I just wanted to serve him with all of my time, even in the hypocrisy. Buy a piece of property. And so I bought a 21 unit. It was an old abandoned hotel. And I was going to renovate it. Didn't have deep pockets at the time or anything. So I would wake up before I went to the bank, and by 5:30 or 6, I'd be up in the attic. I was laying up there with a mask on, goggles on, a Sawzall, cutting out the old galvanized plumbing lines. So we were going to replace all the plumbing. I'd do that until about 7:30, take a quick shower. The bank was 3 blocks down, so I'd go to the bank and work the rest of the day. And that's what my mornings looked like for a long time. But it was in the first week or two that I was doing that Adam Kennedy had shared with me. You guys had just done a church plant in Powell or the Columbus area, and that you guys had done podcasts. I had never heard a podcast. I don't know if I had really heard of a podcast or knew what it was, but anyway, he helped me. He was like, "Okay, here's the app.
Get this app." Podcast listeners, they're listening in.
I'm sure I didn't have the app. It was probably just through the web version, or I didn't know what that even was back then. Man, I'm dating myself. I'm 38 years old. Okay. But I finally got it. And it was like the second or third day or the third or fourth podcast that I even listened to. And I heard you give I'm pretty sure it's 52 minutes testimony. And you opened up by saying, like, you were pretty much crying, I'm pretty sure. You opened up crying and you said, I was going to give this lesson about something really sensitive and you said that your mother-in-law and your sister-in-law had walked in that morning unannounced. You were still in a house church setting.
Both my sister-in-laws and my wife.
Yeah.
In a house church on a couch. They were half the population in that setting. And it was the one day I was going to go public. It wasn't the first time I talked with anybody.
Right.
So if you don't mind, Garrett, let me give just a little backstory to that, that moment. And we're going to pick back up with you. So again, first saw pornography at 16. Then till about 20. So only like 4.5 years of, which is crazy because it felt like forever. I never felt like it was okay. I'm giving you a short story here, but one of the things that changed for me was that two things. There were two men specifically at college that were talking about it openly in the sense that they were on a journey of freedom. And I immediately, like, when I remember like literally walking past hearing them talk about it. And I was like, yeah. And I knew like, oh, like I need to, those might be safe places. The second thing was, I read in the book of James, chapter 5, verse 16, it says, confess your sins to one another and pray for each other and you will be healed. And I had basically tried everything else on my own power, but that. I had done everything else but confess to anyone and allow them to be praying for me in this specific way. And that began, I started meeting with one of the guys basically daily to pray together about it.
Yeah.
And I was praying for him too, and praying for each other, confessing where we needed to. And it changed everything for me. Very quickly got online accountability. And at the time I wasn't married, I was in college. I had this one guy that I was praying with all the time. And then I purposefully got another girl, a girl who would because I wanted that accountability, and invited them both to be accountability partners for my online stuff, which was Triple X Church. It was like the X3 watch stuff back then. Yeah. And used that for a long time. And Circle by Disney is what we use now. But anyways, my life radically, the freedom radically began to pour in. And so for me, though, when I started dating my now wife, Micah, I told her 2 weeks in, and it was probably one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. And I can't really take credit for it, other than I knew she either needs to know that this is a part of my story and break up with me now, or be a part of my journey. And that's made my life a lot easier. I know that's not for a lot of people listening. I know for you, Garrett, that wasn't the path that most people take. And you can't roll back time. So it's never too late. But for me, I invited her into all of it about literally 2-3 weeks into dating, and just kind of ripped that Band-Aid off early. And I was just like, this is where I'm at, and I'm finding freedom, and I want to stay in that. But I'd rather you be a part of my journey to help me and not hide it from you. And because it's a big part of who I am, and in terms of my story. And I didn't want her to miss out on that part of my story. And I felt like if I was going to marry somebody, I wanted to be really transparent. So again, by God's hand in that, but I'd already found freedom up to that point. That was part of it. How I had the courage to do that started where I already had found freedom and gotten some traction in that. But confession and inviting people to pray for me, talk with me was huge. And then the next step was, and we've been married, gosh, how long at that point? But I I got married at 22, probably preached that sermon at 26 or 27, probably 27. Yeah. And I knew that we were starting this new church and I wanted it to be a different context. So like I said, to circle around about church, I wanted it to be a place where people could talk about real stuff and not just be condemned, but be prayed for and encouraged and helped into the things that God wanted for them. So I wanted to set the tone as a founding and lead pastor. I want to say, if I won't do it, why would I expect anybody else to do that? So that's where we get to the living room. And my wife knew, and I knew that I was going to be laying into this in detail and just laying it out there and putting it on the internet for anybody. That's how my parents found out. That's how my siblings found out. That's how Micah's family found out, who wasn't in the room. And, and we get to folks like you. So that was basically like, that's where we get to you, man. And so, okay, you hear this podcast, I'm laying it out there. And what's going through your head, man?
Well, so you just reminded me. So that accountability, I had tried all of my friends in high school, the ones that knew that I looked at or used pornography, were also using it. And you're so young. It's so hard to find accountability with another teenage boy or whatever. Right. And so, but after my wife had caught me a year into our marriage, I was at a Christian college and I went to one of the professors who taught a sex class, and he was like the sexpert. Like, if you need any relationship advice, go to this guy. So I went and told him about the pornography. Like, this was the first time I had confessed pretty much to an adult as a confession, and told him my wife had caught me and all this. You want to know what he said to me?
What do you say?
He said, "So are you able to give her an orgasm?" And I was like, what? And he's like, literally starts like explain. Anyway, I was just like, it was a horrible experience. So yeah, like he was blaming me for I wasn't satisfied in sexual relationship because of orgasm or whatever. That was my experience with literally trying to confess to a church leader. He was a pastor and a professor, and that's where he went with it. And so I literally remember being like, dude, this is so wrong, but also blaming myself. Like, I did think he's got to be right. He's renowned on this campus for his knowledge and wisdom. So he's got to be right. And so that made it even worse. But anyway, so at 30 years old, I'm listening to this podcast. I'm laying on the rafters. Like, there's dust everywhere. It's like built back in the 60s. I'm laying there cutting all this stuff out, pitch black. I've got a lamp on my head. It's 6 a.m, so there's no sunlight out. Listen to this podcast. And as soon as you start, I remember I just shut the Sawzall off. And I just lay there the whole time and listen to this podcast. You were so real, so raw, and so bold and so brave to continue on with that, even though they had all walked in to know this is on a podcast that anyone could listen to. It was, I know the Lord was with me up in that attic that day and showing me, like, revealing to me in my heart, hey, you've been in the church. You've been in a part of the church, served in this church your entire life for 30 years. You've never heard someone talk like this. And I realized you've never heard anyone talk about their sin. We talk about sin in general, but never someone that had a struggle, a stronghold. And it's like, and all the other guys, the boys, the youth, the men are struggling with this, and no one's talking about it. And it was just like, I was in shock. Hearing you do that. And I remember, I think I listened to it 2 more times that day. And that day while I was at work, I texted Adam and I said, hey, get me Cody's number. I want to talk to him. And I texted you that same day, or maybe I think I texted you and said, hey, can we talk? You said, yeah, absolutely. Tomorrow morning at 6. We talked before we had to go to work. And I confessed to you. So you were my second adult confession experience. Right. And I have another story about a second experience. Do what?
Hopefully I sounded a lot different than that guy.
You did. You didn't. And that was key. You didn't accuse. You were so empathetic. You understood me. You were the first person I ever talked to that spoke my language of shame and guilt. And you kept saying, I'll never forget, you kept saying, don't buy the lie. Don't buy the lie. I think that might have been a part of your sermon theme, but it was don't buy the lies. Yeah. And you helped me identify that there's always a lie that leads that we believe, whether it's in whatever it is. It might just be that you have to have it, And so anyway, you encouraged me to do some exercises, but I know doing some exercises very early on, kind of identifying the triggers and just getting it out when I felt something I would text you or we'd talk that day.
Right.
But anyway, I'd said, hey, so anyway, we talked. I'd never felt like that before. Like I could speak to somebody and not just feel shamed that you understood. It was amazing. And I didn't know what it meant, but it was something new and something different. And as an addict, that's what we're always looking for: new hope, new life, new whatever. And I texted you that later that day, or maybe it was the next day, and I said, I'm 1 day porn free. I didn't look at porn. Yeah. And you continue to encourage, and we continue to text every single day. And and it's like, okay, I made it day 2. And like anything past 7 days was always great, but past 14 was crazy. I made it to day 19, and well, I won't go into that story for the sake of time, but I invited someone else into the conversation with us. Right. So then the three of us were texting, holding each other accountable. I was learning so much so fast. And so that was the beginning. Yeah. And the real, like the chains really broke at, I think I was about day 140. My wife read all of our texts between the three of us guys. There was something, I knew she could find it. She had the code to my phone and she could find it, but there was something in me that, like, I think they were so precious to me. I refused to delete them, which is crazy because I've been covering my tracks for years. And so,
well, you're like, I'm actually getting caught for something good. It just incriminates me.
That's right.
It's a both hands.
Yeah. Well, and it incriminated me on I was sharing with you the triggers and what I was lusting after and the thoughts that I was having at those times. And so she read all those things. She walks in the room. I'm laying in the bed. This is weird. I don't lay in the bed a lot.
You're always laying in bed.
But she walks in the room and she said that she read the messages, and she said she didn't yell this time. She was broken. And she said, how could you? You're disgusting. Like, how can you lead? You can lead worship. You can preach. You can lead the youth. You can go do all these things, and you look like you're so perfect and you're so great and you're this great loan officer and you're all these things. How can you do that? And you're just living a lie and you're doing these filthy things behind my back and you're lying to me. I don't even know who you are. Which that's always how I felt about myself. She's sitting here saying it to me.
Yeah.
And she's like, who are you? Like, I don't even know who you are. And she walks out of the room. And so I'm sitting there laying in this bed, and I can't describe this in any other way other than I felt completely aware that she was at the lowest point because she's so loyal, as we talked about earlier. She's at the lowest point. Her husband of 10 years has been using hardcore pornography for 10 years behind her back. Her thinking that I'm everything she needs and she's meeting needs and we're like, everything's great, that she drops down like to her lowest point. Maybe I experience, a few other people know at this point. Yeah. Now she knows I'm not hiding from anyone anymore. And I was experiencing that right there was the freedom. And I felt this euphoric something I'd never felt ever since I was 10 years old, never felt. And I just laid there. I remember laying there on my back looking just like, I don't want this feeling to ever go away.
Yeah.
And I knew it's that you're not hiding. You're not in the darkness anymore. The truth has been exposed. And I feel the Lord, he put it on my heart. He was speaking to me in that moment. Don't ever lie again. This is your chance to come clean and never lie again. And so I'm just laying there realizing I've never felt this way ever. This is the feeling I've been chasing of just like being real. I'm not fake anymore. I might be in big trouble. There might be major consequences coming, but this is what I want to cling to.
Yeah.
And I knew in that moment, don't be defensive. Don't hide. Don't try to fix everything. Just be honest. She comes back in the room. I don't know how long it was because I just remember laying there, just like embracing this feeling. She comes back in and she starts asking questions, lots of questions. And I gave her the truth. And so like the fact that she came back and talked, because she's more of a, like, when something happens, she doesn't want to talk for several days or weeks at a time. That's changed now. She's much better. But at that point, that's how it was. Like I'd sleep on the couch for 3 or 4 days or whatever. So she came back in and she was broken. I think she was trying to just find more ammunition to just storm out and leave at that, like right then and there.
Yeah.
And I said, listen, I've promised to myself and to God thousands of times, I won't ever do this again. I said, I can't promise that to you, but I can promise you right here, right now, I do have control over, and I'm not hopeless in the fact that I'll never lie to you again. If I look, I'll tell you. If I want to look, I'll tell. Like, I won't lie. I won't hide anything. And I knew that, like, part of my ministry, what God has called me to do is to share with men. It's in the darkness that we remain in bondage to the sin. And while we're in sin, we are separated from God, and we can't grow in relationship with him, in intimacy with him. The greatest of God is held back through our unholiness and the separation from him. And it's in the darkness. And so being honest and being open is the greatest form of accountability that we can have. And with that accountability comes support. It comes the love that Christ has showed our fellow brothers and sisters and our wives. And well, so over the next 4 days, we had conversation every single day. I'd get home from, I don't even remember working. That week was a blur. All I remember was I listened to Every Man's Battle straight, like on Saturday. I listened to it 8 hours straight. I don't even think I used the double speed feature, which I do now, but I listened to it straight, never stopped it, just listened to it straight through. Like my brain was consumed as like, this is the time. You are experiencing something you've never experienced. You've never felt this before. You're in the light. This is the time. This is the time, which I'd felt before, but never like this. We were having these conversations, and sometimes it was like, honey, I don't want to tell you the truth. I don't want to tell you the answer. It's going to hurt. Are you sure you want to ask that question? And sometimes she would say, well, very rarely did she say no. She would say, yeah, I do. She was testing me. And I would tell her the truth. And it was so painful. So painful. It's like, what would you look at? What do you want to see? And it's just like, to say those things, if somebody ever saw my Google searches, like how disgusting, how filthy, I would like crawl under a rock. And like, I was telling her the truth to these questions, and it was so freeing. It was so liberating, knowing, just like you said, luckily you did it 2 weeks into your relationship. I'm 13 years into my relationship, but it's like, what I want is to feel real and to not carry this burden in the darkness that I've always carried. And that means telling the truth, whether she's a part of my life or not. And so I was pursuing freedom over protecting who everyone thought I was, who she even thought I was. I was pursuing living in the light more than I cared about anything else. And I did it sensitively. I communicated in a gentle way, but if I felt like I was being defensive, I would stop and say, I'm wanting to defend myself. I'm wanting to water it down, to sugarcoat it. And like, it's like, that's how you slip back into the darkness. You just start watering it down. You just start sugarcoating the truth. You just start trying to make it a little better than it really was, or not as bad as it really was.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you're just slipping back in. And so I needed her to know me. I needed her to know my thoughts. I needed her to know the depths of it all in order for us to move forward in the light,
right.
in the truth. And so
you kind of got to this place. You kind of got to that place where, yes, I was 2 weeks in, but I kind of laid it where it's like, all right, I don't want this to end it, but I'd rather live in freedom and you be a part of that than to feel like I have to live in darkness and secrecy. And but that's hard, and your experience, like that was harder that far in, but it's still, would you say it was worth it though? Like, was it worth all
goodness.
that
so
experience though?
I believe it was
There's
God.
A lot of people saying, hey, that's cool. I could never do that.
But I can't. Right. Yes. And I hear that all the time.
Tell people
I'm not saying everything's the same for everybody, but I haven't even, man, I don't know how you're going to edit this into a decent podcast because there's so much more to it. But in that moment, the God was moving in me in such a way for me to be aware what you're feeling is simply living in the light. And that's all you need to pursue. Just pursue that. And that's all I thought. I can't live in the light if I sugarcoat it. I can't live in the light if I'm just trying to like tame it down. So like I need to be known.
Right.
Nothing can be in the darkness. Nothing shall remain in the darkness. For the next 4 days, I just confessed everything. Maybe it was something about a previous relationship. Maybe it was something I did as a little child, a little boy. Maybe it was anything that I felt like I wanted to hide, I needed to hide, or I always had hidden and forgotten about it. I confessed it to her. He gave her the strength to bear through that. She's a very emotional, a very fragile, delicate woman. And she was able to bear that only through his strength. But on the fourth day, this was the game changer. This is when the chains broke. We were on the couch, and like it had been so tense for 4 days. There at no point had we hugged, made up, but it was like we were just communicating. That was it.
Yeah.
But she allowed me to lay on her lap. Like my head down on her lap. Yeah. I was in this broken state of like, as I would dig deeper, all of the brokenness just came to the surface. Mm-hmm. And I remember I actually had gotten onto the ground and I was laying on her knees in her lap like this, talking to her, and she was sitting on the couch, and I'm just sitting there weeping, knowing what you're about to say, she could take it. If she wants to, she could just rip your head off for saying this. But I said it anyway because it was so real. And I said, I've been so alone since I was 10 years old. This is the heaviest thing I've ever carried. I have absolutely no doubt it's the heaviest thing I will ever carry in my entire life. Yeah. I've carried it for 20 years all alone with nobody to talk to, with nobody to give me wisdom, with nobody to hold me accountable, nobody ever. Why didn't somebody from church talk to me? Why didn't my parents talk to me? Why is there no one to, but it was like, I felt so lonely. And as I'm sitting there and saying, and I'm so sorry that you're even having to hear about how pitiful I am. I'm laying there looking away from her, and she says, I forgive you. And I'm like, what? Like, I look up at her and I'm like, what did you just say? Yeah. She's weeping, and she says, I forgive you.
Yeah.
And it was at that moment I knew that it's only through the grace, through the forgiveness that our great, great God showed her for her sins, for her shortcomings, for her unholy unrighteousness. That's how she knows a forgiveness like that. And that in that moment, the Holy Spirit was indwelling inside of her, because her and her flesh wanted to just kill me. Her and her flesh wanted to say, I'll never trust you again. And she said, I forgive you. And it was in that moment that I knew I had everything that I would need to be freed from this, to break free. It felt like the chains broke in that very moment. And I said, in the next 20 minutes, the course of the next 20 minutes, it was, I'm never going to look again. It wasn't like, it's not that I'm just going to tell you the truth. I'm never going to lie to you again. It was, I'm never going to look again. What God has done in my heart in the last 5 days specifically, or the last 140 days since I heard your podcast, or maybe since the time I led that, because I think it all started with the prayer when I finally surrendered myself to him and said, you do the work, you figure that out.
Yeah.
It was, and when I prayed the prayer after you and I got off the phone that very first time, day one that we talked, and I fully surrendered to him and I said, you do this. I can't figure this out. I've broken every boundary, every single milestone in life that I thought was going to be my freedom. It's gone. Everything's gone. I can't figure it out. I've memorized every scripture. I've broken 3 laptops. I've smashed phones. I've thrown stuff into the creek. I've done it all. I can't figure it out. I'm losing this battle. Lord, you do it. I give it to you. Do whatever you can with this. I'm done. I'm done with it.
Yeah.
That was the day. That was after you and I got off the phone call.
Yeah.
144 days later, I'm sitting on my wife's lap, and she says, I forgive you. I knew God forgives me and loves me. My wife just forgave me and loves me, even though a 20-year secret sin had just surfaced. And I knew I will not return to my vomit. Even though I had thousands and thousands of times before returned to my vomit. In this moment, I knew God is with me. She's with me. You were with me. But more than anything, I felt the work happen inside of me. Yeah. And that was on the day that I talked to you, that was day one. That was October 21st, 2015. I have not looked at a single pornographic image since then. Not one. And that's almost 8 years ago. Here in just a few months. That's almost 8 years ago. And so I have been working with men, coaching individually or in groups, literally since day 19, when we had that third person join our accountability group. I hope they're a guest on this podcast. I'd love for all 3 of us to be on there and talk about that. But I knew in that moment, while I was sitting on my wife's lap after she had said, I forgive you, I said, I will never shut my mouth about this. I knew that's what God was telling me. I'm going to free you. And I want you to spread the same message of light versus darkness, right? Freedom is different than sobriety. Like I'm going to offer you something that I want you to tell the rest of the world about. And I'm doing that. I'm going to continue to do that. And, I can sit in a church of 100 men and know there's 70 of them struggling with this, and our church is doing nothing. I can sit in a church of 1,000 and know that there's 1,000 men, 700 of them are struggling with this, and we're doing nothing. What are we doing? This is separating men from their wives. This is separating them from being the best fathers that they can be. It's separating them from the God who they have given their life to. And I want to do whatever I can. And I rely greatly on the Holy Spirit. It is a battle men fight for decade upon decade upon decade. And they're so overtaken with hopelessness and guilt and shame. And I want to see them taste freedom, because once you taste it, I hope it's much like it was a transformational moment for me when I heard about freedom from you. Yeah. And then I tasted it for myself the day my wife walked in.
There's nothing like it, man.
Disgusting. I felt it. And once you taste it, it gives you a whole new motivation in life, because you don't have this fear of, no one can ever find out. It just changes the way you see and perceive everything. And so, I just want to be a part of that. So if anybody's out there, I would love to be a part of that journey with you. And
I know that I'm going to give out my email address, betterequippedwithcody@gmail.com. You can go to my website, betterequipped.net. I'm easy to find. So reach out to me if you feel like there's nobody I can talk to. Garrett too, either you connect through me to him, or I'm not trying to put Garrett on the spot to give out his email address, but either way, we're both in relationship together, and there's ways that we can both connect with you. So just reach out to me, and I can help connect you with me or him or whatever seems appropriate. But don't be afraid to put your name on it. It's not us to share. It's not our job to share your story with anybody else in the sense of telling people in your life. But if you feel like there's nobody you can talk to, if you felt like there is no hope and there's no way to find freedom from this, that no one can ever know, and you really honestly haven't just ever confessed it, and allowed not just your prayers, which is important, but the prayers of others and the accountability, the encouragement of others, replacing the lies with the truth of God. We want to be a part of that journey for you. And so I hope this time, Garrett, thank you for being on this episode. Like I'm so grateful for your willingness to share just so honestly with us. And I know for me, I could have kept, there's so much even more to talk about. I feel like,
yeah, there is.
So we'll keep the dialogue going, but for today's sake, I just hope that for those of you who are out there who have just given up hope, I pray that today is your podcast. Like this is your, whether you're in the attic cutting down lead pipes or something, like that today is the day where you say, oh, like Jesus, I need that hope. And it's real. And for these guys, it's real. And we've seen other men experience that freedom as well. And that's so right. It's real. And so you just got to step into it. Again, look up James chapter 5, verse 16, and really think about, am I actually living into that? Have I actually done what it says? Or am I trying to do everything else but confess and allow people to pray for me so that I can find healing? And that's what I needed. And I know, Garrett, that's what you needed. And that's probably what a lot of people need too. So Garrett, again, thank you for being, joining us today. And man, we hope that you feel better equipped because of conversations like this. All right. We'll see you later, guys.
All right. Thanks.